Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name's Joe Garland, and today I have Renée Gendron, who's here to talk about a new novella that's coming out. I think its publication date is this coming Tuesday, and I've known Renée for a while, and she's been very helpful to my books. And I thought I'd talk to her about her book and let her talk to you about her book. And then we'll talk a little bit more about her and the process that she took to get to the book. So welcome, Renée.
Oh, welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Joe. It's always a pleasure to chat.
And so the book is 7 Points of Contact. And why don't you tell us first whence the title comes, and then tell us what you want us to know about the book or the novella.
Well, the title, 7 Points of Contact, is based on one of the characters who he was a salesperson for, and it's a marketing strategy where you need 7 interactions, 7 points of contact with a potential customer to convert that lead into a customer. And he actually goes through the book at 7 different interactions before they become a romantic couple.
So it's basically a way of getting from point A to a sale.
That's right.
And his objective is to close the deal.
That's exactly
Now, could you just tell us a little bit what deal he's trying to close?
Form a relationship with her.
Okay, her being?
Her being Miranda Taylor, and she is a car loans officer.
Okay, therefore fairly familiar with the concept of 7 points of contact. Now, I've read the book, and I note that you have the those are your 2 main characters. So why don't you just give us some detail as to where it happens and kind of just the general sense of what the reader can expect to happen without giving away too much.
The book is based in Kingston, Ontario, and Kingston is on the St. Lawrence, and it has a population of about 120, 130,000. It is a contemporary, and what readers can expect is a bit of humor, right? This is a humorous book. There are interesting moments of banter between the characters and between secondary characters. The background is Miranda is a softball player, and she has a struggling team, and through her development as a character and her leadership abilities, she's able to turn the team around into not quite a winning season, but at least make a good go of it for the team.
And what's the name? What's the name of the team, and why is it named that?
Well, it's women's softball. This is almost a beer league, except that they often play on Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. So it's quite difficult to warrant and accept a beer at 10 a.m. when the game is over. The league is women's softball in Kingston Amateur League for fun. And the original sponsor of the league was a fishmonger, a fish seller. And the different teams are named after fish in order to promote that. Company.
So why don't you just tell us, how did these people get together?
It's by pure coincidence. So Miranda is going out for a beer with a few of her teammates after another loss. They're quite demoralized. Everybody chugs beers and go home because it's not really interesting to be on a losing team. Miranda sticks around the bar for a while, saying it's 9 o'clock. She's far too young to be going home at 9. She's 34 years old, 35 years old, so she's not going to go to bed at 9. She goes up to the bar and watches a Toronto Maple Leafs hockey game. Somebody is bothering her. She tells him to leave, and then she strikes up a conversation with another fellow across the bar. And it's just a little spark. Nothing happens there, but they get to know one another. And over the course of the book, they meet one another to watch Maple Leafs games and to talk about promotions and to talk about just life in general and the direction of where Jonas, the male lead, would like to go.
Just to be clear, when you say they play at 7 a.m., those are the weekend games, because they have to get home to take care of whatever, so their husbands or significant others can get out. But you're talking about during the week, yeah, they're going to the bar after the game, after a demoralized loss, and they're watching the Maple Leafs. Does one have to know how hockey is played to understand this book?
No, no. There is some actual hockey history in there for anybody who remembers the '90s epic series between the Sabres and the New Jersey Devils. So that is mentioned in quite accurate detail. And no, it's just basically, are the Leafs winning or losing? And they talk a little bit about strategy without being overwhelming about it. It really is about banter. It's just about the camaraderie of people enjoying the sport and getting to know one another through that sport a little bit. But
And
softball
you get the sense of people going to a bar, sports bar, and you know, it has happened in the New York area with hockey. It also happens with all sorts of other games where you kind of get into a bar and you can just see all the screens, all the monitors with the games, and kind of a camaraderie that you really can't have at home. And that, I guess, is the key to your setting of just a bunch of Maple Leaf fans watching the game and kind of in part all united in watching the game, but also little groups of people, including our two people watching the game, and then developing a relationship with camaraderie and, as you say, the back and forth that people engage in. Now, it is a romance, so are you going to tell us whether they get together at the end?
Well, it is a romance, and my romances always end with the two leads ending up in a serious romantic relationship.
So this is, as with all romances, which are technically is supposed to end like that. We know where it's going to end. The interesting part is watching how it gets from point A to point B. And this is, as you kind of tipped your hand, this is one in which the relationship evolves basically on two people with some common interests, and more common interests than many other people may have, gradually getting more and more comfortable with one another. Is that a fair characterization of it?
I think so.
Okay.
And I do think they help one another out in other aspects of their lives. They have other problems that they can help each other out with. For example, Jonas's father is struggling with cancer, and so that there's a bit of emotional baggage there. And and Jonas wants to pursue a lifelong dream of opening a sporting goods store, but it's fear, and it's also the struggle of having to start again after a pretty brutal divorce. And for her, it's also learning about self-esteem and believing about her leadership abilities to go and chase her career and to take the next step for additional responsibility. And they help each other realize that they have all what they need to do to achieve their goals. It's just a question of accepting it and embracing it and taking that last leap of faith to work towards their goals. So it's quite nice along that level as well.
I'll confess that my favorite secondary character was the woman who works at the car dealership.
That's jealous.
For some reason, she is like, yeah, I'll just say she's as you mentioned, that they both have issues. She kind of like bursts in whenever she shows up, like a breath of fresh air and perspective for her in particular. So I particularly liked your the way you described her in the story. So why don't you tell us how you ended up doing this particular story, and then you can tell us more about the other things that you've done and that you do.
Well, in 2021, decided that I was going to branch out to do other kinds of writing. Really, for the better part of a decade, I've only written fantasy, and then the fantasy morphed into fantasy romance. None of those books are published because I have to rewrite them all. There's no point in me editing. I have to do a complete rewrite. And my brain broke, and I needed to write something different. I started off with contemporary in general, and the banter actually worked. I realized that when I write contemporary, I can be quite funny, and the characters have a different level of banter between them. With the Heart and by Sport series, so 7 Points of Contact is the first novella in that series. I wanted to see what I can combine for sports and Kingston. I personally like the city of Kingston, even though I don't live there. And I wanted to just play around with those dynamics. I've never written a sports short story or a sports book. This is not about sports. You'll get some banter, but this is really about the romantic couple figuring out how to make this relationship work. And it was a challenge. And I picked a trope, I picked a setting, and I picked a sport. And I'm seeing what I can do back and forth in terms of those interactions. And that was the genesis of 7 Points of Contact.
Well, of course, I mentioned that the point of a romance is the journey and how they get there. And the essence of that becomes, to me, and I think it was reflected in your book, the comfort level between the main characters. And they gradually do the type of things where they can have banter without overthinking it. Things can come out quickly and the other people respond to it, and it builds the relationship. So that's what so that type of thing is essential to the journey. But are you particularly familiar with softball?
Softball?
Softball,
No.
yeah, you mentioned of Kingston, so that's your location, and you picked softball. And well, let me put it this way. I assume from having read it that you are pretty conversant in the National Hockey League.
Hockey, absolutely. I would not be Canadian without it.
I just wanted to, I assume that was the case. So that's why I didn't ask you if you knew hockey. I was asking you if you knew softball. So
softball, I used to watch a lot of baseball prior, and I'm very familiar with baseball. I won't be able to tell you statistics upon statistics upon statistics.
But do you know who Joe Carter is?
Joe Carter, yeah, he was a Toronto Blue Jays, and he didn't he have the game?
Yeah, he did.
That's 95.
Yeah, he's the guy who hit the
walk-off
home run. Okay, I just want to test it. Even I know that.
I paid attention.
Okay. So you have general familiarity with baseball, and you converted into what sport would a woman engage in which there's a fair degree of interaction with players, and there are spectators. Those, I guess, were your key components, because you do have a fair amount of interaction with her and the other members of the team.
Well, one of the things is having a team sport, regardless of that. Otherwise, it just makes the character very isolated, and they have no one. Golf is a very individual sport, for example. I wanted a team sport. I wanted it something during the summer setting. Hockey, therefore, is out. Field hockey does not cut it. And I looked up the rules of softball, and to my memory, there are 7 innings in softball, and there are different rules for how you pitch, if I'm not mistaken. So there you go. I did look up the rules. I did try.
Well, no, let me just tell you about pitching, just as an aside. Someone wrote a book, like the concept was, if you need to practice something for 10,000 hours to become proficient at it. You may have heard that. And the book begins with an anecdote about a top line women's softball pitcher who pitches underhand. And the story is, she goes, and there are a bunch of high-level Major League Baseball players, and they're up, and they say, "Oh, there's this woman throwing a softball at me, underhanded. I'm going to be able to just smash the hell out of the ball." And consistently, they would all strike out because of the difference. The point being, you develop a particular skill set, and softball is a little bit different from baseball. But so much for that digression. No, so you had the team sport, right? You had the interaction with other players on the team, and you had the bonus of, I've stories of people who've been runners, and I understand it's harder to have interaction with teammates in running, but they do exist, but you don't have the ability to have someone watching you consistently for the game and being able to communicate with you, which I think was an important thing in your story. So that gives us the sport, gives us a location, and then your job, and I thought you did a good job of this, was filling in the details, getting from point A to point B, or from home plate around the bases and scoring again. So that book is it's only going to be an ebook?
For the time being, it's an ebook. It's actually 24,000 words. That would be quite thin for a printed book. So right now, I just put it out as an ebook. Yeah.
And Okay, so now you have your fantasy things that have been on the back burner for a while, and you're moving into the contemporary world. And I'll just say that I am more contemporary. I am a real world type of person. I'm not big on fantasy and whatnot, historical, contemporary, whatnot. So what else have you been working on the non-fantasy realm?
I have Jaded Hearts, and that will be book one of Frontier Hearts. That's coming out in March.
And what's
that
that?
one
What's that
was-
about?
It's set in 1885 Alberta, Canada. It would have actually been Northwest Territories at the time, but for us, I'm talking so we can have a current location. It's Alberta, right near the Montana border.
But I assume you're going to be
And-
referring to it by its name at that time.
That's correct. Inside the book, it'll be referred to as the fictional town of Prosper, and it will be in the Northwest Territories.
Okay.
And that book is also a romance. I write romances. One thing that you'll notice across genres and across my books is that my characters are busy. They're not just thinking about how do I get together with the other romantic lead or why my relationship with the other romantic lead isn't working. They're not consumed exclusively by that relationship. They have lives, they have friends, they have independent goals. Without putting up too many spoilers, he owns a general store that is struggling, and he is quite lonely. He had one serious relationship that went really sour, and it broke his heart. It's been several years since then, and this is Northwest Territories in 1885. There weren't that many women. He ended up ordering, through a mail order bride, he ended up having a connection with somebody. And Ruthanna, who is the female lead, she comes out from Vancouver, actually Gastown at the time, but Gastown is still now a neighborhood within Vancouver. And they take the train, the newly minted train. I had to do the sequencing right on this because the last spike was only a year and a half or so earlier. And I wanted to make sure that they had a reasonably rapid mode of transport because it's a great distance and the Rocky Mountains are very difficult to traverse. Like once you're over the mountain, you stay, right? No cars.
Well, that's the thing that when you write historicals, and it's, I don't know how people did it in the old days, but the access to the internet allows you to, I had to get someone in 1870 from a rural town in Ireland to Queenstown, which is no longer called Queenstown since it's in Ireland and they changed the name to Cove. So I had to track down maps, and I did the same thing when I was looking at some project out west in the US of what railroad lines existed at that point. Because the reality is, how does someone get from point A to point B? And it's hard enough on the East Coast in that period, but the notion of almost the wilderness, the frontier. So you were able to find that, in fact, there was a train line that could get her from Gastown or whatever to Prosper.
It would have gone to Calgary, and then I just added a train line down, just fictional purposes, but I could at least get her across the Rockies in a matter of days as opposed to months on a pack mule.
In fact, I learned that the closest for my character, the closest place to get a train, which was a train going east-west or to the west in Ireland, and then you catch one that would go due south, was a town called Knocklong. And it happens that I have actually sent a copy of my book to my wife's cousin, and it goes through Knocklong, the town there. So you're able to get your historic set. Yeah, that's the thing. How do you get from, thank goodness you found the train. She's in Prosper. And as you point out, once you cross those Rockies, you're unlikely to cross back. So that sets you up with your romance there. Is there anything particular beyond that you want to tell us, or do we have to wait to get the book?
Well, and it's the first in the series because I like series and they're fun. Communities are fun to write. She has a very unusual profession, and she is taking after her father, who was a prospector. And it's an interesting, not a period piece in the sense that it's not meant to be extremely historically accurate, but I do make sure that their clothing is accurate. I do make sure that the train actually ran at least Northwest Territories. I make sure of some of the terminologies that was accurate. Again, not Alberta. And They were not part of Canada at the time. They were still a colony of Britain. There are some nuances in what they can and cannot do and the kinds of administration or government that they had. Um, and it's another slow burn romance, as the two main leads, have a lot of baggage is such long term, I think, but they have a lot of difficulties in their childhood, a lot of poverty, a lot of stress, a lot of uncertainty where they moved around a lot. Um, the main character, Ruthanna, takes after her father a little bit, but also has some conflict with her mother about how she was raised. And Bertram, the lead male character, is in constant conflict with his father over life choices and over the lifestyle that his father leads, because his father is a petty criminal, and the consequences of trying to deal with a tarnished family name, but he's also trying to establish a legitimate business. A lot of tension in the family that needs to be sorted out. It doesn't all get sorted out, but the characters have to address this in a way in order to move on with their lives.
Were you able to find whether there were women prospectors at that time?
I looked at photos for 1880, 1890 Gastown, Vancouver. No word of a lie. It was 9.5 men per woman, right? Like the ratio is really overwhelmingly male. But I did find some prospecting women, not many, but there are photos. I don't know who they are in the photos, but they were there circa 1880, 1890.
Because that's one of the things you have to deal with in historical, particularly for a woman, is what options were available for that person at that time in that place. And it's interesting because some of my stories are set at the same time or shortly before then, but on the East Coast of the US, in the cities. And it's hard to think, if you're focusing on the cities on the East Coast, how much different, Alberta or the Northwest Territories were, Wyoming, Montana, and whatnot. They were still the frontier back then. And so you have 9.5 men per woman in certain areas. And I can understand that. And I guess one thing I enjoy is kind of realizing what life was like. You and I had a bit of a chat on Twitter when one of the things that came up was with your female main character, the impact that we can't necessarily understand of leaving someplace and having it be very unlikely you're ever going to go back to where you come from. And I just don't know how much we appreciate the desperation that some of the people in our histories, our personal histories, must have gone through, because we're in America, and our people come from where they come from originally. But I assume you felt that level of entering into that world that is completely or largely unfamiliar to us today. The world, in your case, it's more familiar for the East Coast because there were streets and apartment buildings and transport and whatnot, as opposed to the frontier, which is a completely a place that is completely unfamiliar to us.
Right. What's interesting about that is the interchange. One of the things with Canada, we've always had a smaller population than the United States, and our weather is much more cold and harsh. We'll find that women were doing some of the work men were doing, in part because they had no choice. There weren't enough people to do the work, and in part because it's really, really cold. If that wood isn't chopped, good luck trying to survive the winter when it's minus 40 on the prairie. So they're a lot more egalitarian on that front. But it's also interesting to see, there were First Nation peoples already settled for thousands of years throughout North America, and to see how there was some cultural exchange is not quite the right word given the history between those, but adaptations and learning to deal with these frigid weathers and learning about them. I kind of lost my train of thought, but
you were talking about basically if you didn't, there are certain things that you didn't really care who did it. If it's a woman, that's fine, but it's got to be done. And so
Yeah.
they didn't have the demarcation of duties, responsibilities that we might have had, let's say, in New York City in the same time period.
That and homesteading, the idea of homesteading is it was very prominent in Canadian history. And people don't quite get that the whole idea of being self-sufficient and the necessity for it, because there's literally nobody else. You can't order things from the internet. People are going to do drop ships from wherever. You needed to be able to do everything you needed to survive on your own. And that concept is completely different. I heard of a story of a friend of a friend. An ancestor was in the British Army, the English Army, and as a reward for their service, they were allotted land. That was their compensation, and the land was in Upper Canada, in modern day Ontario. And they arrived at the port, and the nearest port would have likely been York, present day Toronto, down the St. Lawrence by the Great Lakes. Okay, go to Toronto. The soldier walked 3 months into the wilderness, into the absolute bush. No trail, no goat trail, nothing, and got his land. 3 months of straight walking, and then he got his compensation for his service. That's completely unfathomable to most people today. You just walk for 3 months for your parcel land. But he made it, and then he also got married, and so presumably she walked a fair distance to join him. And so it's kind of a little interesting tidbits of history and family history and oral history.
And then how do you interweave that reality that is so much at odds with our experience with the story that we can relate to, even though we don't walk 3 months to get our little patch of land in northern wherever?
Stories are based on tropes, and they're based on setting, and they're based on character and character development. And the setting provides some unique constraints, regardless of which setting you're at. Ruthanna, for example, I gave my women characters a lot more flexibility than most women at the time would have had. However, there's also the reality that women who were on European descendants who were on what is their frontier, that's a different experience. There's a hardiness there. There's a sense of adventure. There's a different, for her to be there, to be motivated to go out there, there's already a certain personality trait where she's got perhaps more of a backbone to dare to go out, or is more desperate, like you said, depending on where the circumstances are. Now there's that. And my characters are a lot more independent than what they would have been at the time. I have to acknowledge that at some level. They're not going out escorted. They don't have as much family pressure as a woman at that time would have had. And I think that just makes them more interesting. And I think it's very important to note that regardless of the time in history, there was always a woman who did something, even though it was against the grain. Even though she was the only woman doctor, or the only woman prospector, or the only woman insert the field, she dared, and she was going to hit a lot of adversity. She probably faced a lot of sideways glances and a lot of open hostility for her being there. But women have done it, and women have continued to do it. There's always going to be an individual, regardless of race, gender, linguistic group, religion, whatever category is us versus them, who goes, no, I'm going to do it anyways. And those make for interesting characters, because the problems and the constraints and the issues that they face can be fleshed out and really incorporated to make the setting more real, but also to give them more of a developmental challenge, right? A character arc in order to thrive.
No, I agree with that. It's, as long as you find that it may have been rare, but it was possible for a woman to do a particular thing in a particular place at a particular time, then you can develop the woman character. And this is particularly, I think, a woman characters because of the restraints on what was appropriate in the period, that you can flesh them out as characters, give them a streak of independence that they would not otherwise have, which to me works well for developing the story, which is, in my situations, there are many stories of women who don't do that. It's like they follow the normal path. It creates a more interesting or different, not necessarily more interesting character, but you basically give agency, I guess they call it, with independence. And that helps develop the character, develops the story. Now, why a series? Why? And you have the sports series, and you have the Wilderness Prosper or Alberta series. Why do you want to do series? And what do you mean by series?
I do series because I love to write and I have too many ideas. I do series because they're fun to build in the same communities and to see how people interact with one another. Like, for example, in my Outdoorsman series, that is the contemporary Canadian mystery series, also based in Kingston, but those are romances. I always write romance. That one, I will have a series where the characters know one another and they have different professions, and so they just kind of pick up different crimes as they go along. The fantasy series is one giant 30-book arc. You can pick up one book as a standalone, that's great, but there's an actual series-long arc. For the sports is simply the theme of the series, and the characters won't know one another. And I just wanted to play around with the theme of sports and romance and contemporary, and that's the theme of the series, but they don't know each other. And for Frontier Hearts, the Western historical, that will be based in one community where the different characters will bump into one another and they might make cameos, but every book is standalone. I like to write different kinds of series because it's interesting if I can pull the attention for an entire 30 books, or if I can just group things around themes, or if I can see how I can get standalones within a community like the Western historicals, and just explore that community and that dynamics to see. I don't know yet if I'm going to bring, so it starts in 1885. And I looked this up. The first motorized vehicle was in Alberta in 1903, I believe, or 1901, 1903. So I'm not sure how much I want to advance it, or if that's going to be my cutoff, because once you start getting mechanized vehicles, you sort of lose that Wild West sort of historical theme of the European frontier in settled lands, right? So we'll see how that goes, but it's just interesting to see the constraints within a series and to see what you can do to do character developments between books where applicable.
Are they going to be sequels or just related?
Which ones?
Talking about the Alberta ones, the historicals.
The Alberta ones are all going to be standalone books with new romantic couples.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which will gradually, I assume, fill out the community, but yes, the characters in one will be doing cameos in the others, but simply because they happen to exist in the same geographic location and not because their story is particularly relevant to the story in book 2 or book 3 or book 4, as opposed to a sequel. I understand.
But the fantasy series, that will matter.
And yes, because you're building a world.
I'm building a world, and the main characters on book 1, they have, I think, 3 other books in which they are also the main characters, but all of the other books have secondary characters becoming primary characters for that book. And what happens to them has ripple effects and significant consequences later down on the series as the story, but also on other individual characters.
Okay. So what else do you want us to, let me just see if I can do this, Renee. Let me just see if I can. I don't know. Can you see that?
I can, absolutely.
So this is the cover of the new novella, Heartened by Sport. Okay. Just wanted to have people be able to see that. Let me see. See if I got it. Okay, so you sent that to me earlier. Thank you for doing that. Anything else you want us to know about you, about your book, about Canada, about the Maple Leafs?
We'll not talk about the Leafs, right? Because the standard reply is, this is the year, right? That's the standard reply for like decades. This is the year we win the cup. No, I am available to chat with if you are on Twitter. That's where I spend most of my time. However, I also have a Facebook page.
And what's your, because you are pretty active on Twitter, and you make a point of connecting with people new to the writing community there and just try to develop a relationship there. So what is your handle on Twitter?
Renée Gendron, and that'll just at Renée Gendron. I presume under the YouTube channel description, I'll have my name there.
Okay.
Yeah, just put my Twitter handle there.
Okay.
And that's I do have a newsletter, and newsletters includes snippets and sneak peeks and guest posts, and people are more than welcome to sign up for that. I have my website, reneegendron.com, and I also have a Facebook page. And yeah, so I look forward to hearing from people about people. If anybody would, yeah, I'm always looking for advanced readers if anybody's interested in being on the list. So there you go.
Okay. So what we'll do is you'll send me the your links, your handles. I'll put them in the comments for this video, and I think that about does it for now. I appreciate you coming on, Renee.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity, Joe.
Okay, so I if you weren't in Canada, I would say it was cold here, but you're in Canada, so you would laugh. You would laugh at you call that cold?
How cold is it today here in Ottawa? It is so cold that the drainage pipe on my furnace froze.
Oh, okay. Well, I say nothing. It's not that cold here in very sunny but chilly New York. So thank you, Renee, for joining us. And that's it. And I hope to see you people soon. Thank you.